I paid to make sure they'd never exist. His voice cracked, trembling as he stared at the 3 children before him. And yet here they are. Zaira's eyes blazed with fury. You handed me money like I was some problem to be solved. Please, Zaira, let me explain. Explain what, Caleb? Her voice cut through the air like a blade. How you looked me in the eyes and said, take care of it, before walking away? His knees buckled, hitting the cold airport floor. I was wrong. I was a coward. Mommy, who is this man? Little Kai whispered, tugging at her sleeve. Caleb's breath caught. I'm your father. Don't you dare claim that word so easily, Zaira snapped. A father shows up. A father protects. You paid me to erase them. Welcome back to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, where love stories reveal life's deepest truths. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because today's story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and redemption. Now, let's dive into this incredible journey. Seattle's downtown district hummed with the energy of ambition and possibility. Glass towers stretched toward gray clouds, their surfaces reflecting the dreams of thousands who walked these streets daily, chasing futures they could barely afford to imagine. Zaira Ellis hurried along the crosswalk, her canvas bag heavy with legal textbooks that seemed to multiply each semester. At 24, she moved through the world with purpose, even when that world felt determined to remind her she didn't quite belong. Her scholarship covered tuition, but everything else, rent, food, the professional clothes she wore to her internship, came from careful budgeting and weekend shifts at a coffee shop near campus. That morning, her internship supervisor had thrust a stack of files into her hands with barely a glance. Whitlock Foundation. Downtown. They're expecting these within the hour. The Whitlock Foundation building rose before her like a monument to power she'd only read about in newspapers. Marble columns, polished floors that reflected her nervous face, and the kind of hushed efficiency that whispered of money older than the city itself. She clutched the files tighter, reminding herself she belonged here, even if only temporarily. The elevator carried her to the executive floor, where thick carpets muffled her footsteps and oil paintings watched from gilded frames. She followed the corridor, checking office numbers, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that seemed too loud for such a sacred space. That's when it happened. Her heel caught in the edge of an ornate rug, sending her stumbling forward. The stack of files tilted dangerously, papers threatening to scatter across the pristine floor like autumn leaves in a windstorm. Strong hands caught them before they fell. Steady, sure hands that belonged to a man who stood tall before her, white shirt pressed to perfection, jacket slung casually over his arm. You move fast for someone carrying half a library, he said, his voice calm, laced with humor that reached his eyes. Embarrassed heat flooded her cheeks as she tried to steady her breath. And you don't look like someone who usually helps interns. That made him smile. Slow, amused, genuinely delighted. Then maybe you don't know me yet. She looked up into storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her professional mask to something deeper. This was Caleb Whitlock. She'd seen his photograph in business magazines, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of him. The way he commanded space without effort, the intelligence that sparked behind his gaze, the unexpected warmth in his smile. Caleb Whitlock, he said, extending his hand. Zaira Ellis. Her hand disappeared into his, and the contact sent electricity up her arm. From Morrison and Associates. The Patterson merger files? Among others. She gestured to the stack he still held. Your afternoon reading. He glanced at the files, then back at her. Have you read through them? The question surprised her. Most executives barely acknowledged interns existed, let alone asked their opinions. Yes. I review everything I deliver. Professional habit. And? She hesitated. This was dangerous territory, offering unsolicited analysis to one of Seattle's most powerful men. But something in his expression encouraged honesty. You're paying 30% above market value for the Patterson properties. Either you know something the market doesn't, or you're making an expensive mistake. His eyebrows rose. Which do you think it is? You don't strike me as someone who makes expensive mistakes. Interesting. He studied her face as if memorizing it. What's your theory? Location. 3 blocks from the new light rail station, 2 blocks from the university expansion. You're not buying properties, you're buying the future. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that made her pulse quicken. Most people see current value, not potential. Most people don't grow up watching neighborhoods change overnight. I know what development looks like from the ground up. They stood there in the corridor, the files forgotten between them, the air charged with something neither could name. Other employees passed by, but they might as well have been invisible. I should let you get back to your work, Zyra said finally, reaching for the files. He handed them over but didn't step back. Actually, I was about to grab coffee. There's a place downstairs that makes decent espresso. Care to join me? Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings. He was Caleb Whitlock, heir to a political dynasty, worth more money than she could comprehend, moving in circles she'd never access. She was a scholarship student from a neighborhood where dreams came with payment plans. I don't think that's appropriate, she said carefully. Probably not, he agreed, but his eyes held hers. But I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on the Patterson deal. 15 minutes. The elevator ride down was charged with tension neither acknowledged. When the doors opened to the lobby, neither moved. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibilities and unspoken questions. You know, he said, voice low, you challenge me in ways no one else dares to. That's because everyone else is afraid of you, she replied, clutching her bag tighter. And you're not. She met his eyes, steady. I don't have the luxury of fear. The elevator doors began to close, then opened again as someone else approached. The spell broke and they stepped into the lobby together. In the building's cafe, surrounded by the low hum of business conversations, they found a corner table. Caleb ordered for both of them, espresso for him, cappuccino for her, and she found herself curious rather than irritated by his presumption. So tell me about Zyra Alice, he said, leaning back in his chair. Law student, obviously. But there's more. Not much to tell. Scholarship student, part-time intern, weekend barista. The usual struggling student story. I doubt anything about you as usual. The compliment sent warmth through her chest. What about you? Besides being Seattle royalty, I mean. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. Seattle royalty. I like that. Makes it sound more glamorous than it is. Isn't it? Sometimes. Other times it feels like wearing a suit that doesn't quite fit. Everyone expects you to fill it perfectly, but you're not sure you're the right size. The vulnerability in his admission surprised her. She'd expected polished answers, political deflection. Instead, he was giving her something real. That's why you noticed my analysis, she said, understanding dawning. You're looking for perspectives that aren't filtered through expectations. Exactly. He leaned forward, eyes intense. You see things clearly because you're not invested in maintaining illusions. Their conversation flowed easily, moving from business to books to dreams they'd never shared with anyone else. He told her about the weight of family expectations, the loneliness of being seen as a symbol rather than a person. She shared her mother's sacrifices, her determination to build something meaningful from nothing. I should get back, she said finally, glancing at her watch. An hour had passed like minutes. Of course. He stood as she did, reaching into his jacket. My card. In case you have more insights about our deals. Their fingers touched as she took the card, and this time neither pulled away immediately. The moment stretched, filled with recognition and possibility. Zyra, he said softly. Yes. Thank you. For seeing the person instead of the position. Walking back to Morrison and Associates, Zyra felt the business card burning in her pocket. She told herself it was just networking, just the kind of opportunity any smart law student would pursue. But the way her heart raced when she thought about seeing him again told a different story entirely. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed with increasing frequency. Coffee runs became lunch meetings. Professional discussions evolved into personal conversations that stretched long past business hours. He would linger after meetings, finding excuses to seek her opinion on contracts and proposals. You're becoming quite the regular consultant, her supervisor noted one afternoon, watching Caleb's assistant request Zyra specifically for another delivery. She tried to keep things professional, but the attraction was undeniable. The way he looked at her when she challenged his assumptions. The way he listened, really listened, when she spoke. The way he made her feel like the most fascinating person in the room. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. He told her about childhood summers at the family estate, where he felt more like a guest than a son. She shared stories of her mother working 3 jobs, how they'd celebrate small victories with ice cream from the corner store. You make me remember who I wanted to be, he said one afternoon as they walked through Pioneer Square. Before I learned to be who everyone expected. And who did you want to be? Someone who mattered for the right reasons. Someone who built things instead of just inheriting them. She stopped walking, studying his profile. You still can be. Can I? He turned to face her, something vulnerable in his expression. Sometimes I think I'm too far down the wrong path to find my way back. Everyone can find their way back, Caleb. The question is whether you want it badly enough. That evening, as autumn painted Seattle in shades of gold and crimson, he walked her to her car in the underground garage. The air smelled faintly of rain and possibility, silence hanging between them like a question waiting to be asked. Zaira, he said, stepping closer. Yes. Would you have dinner with me? Not business. Just us. She should have said no. Should have remembered the careful boundaries she'd built around her heart, the focus that had carried her this far. But when he looked at her like that, as if she were the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life, rational thought became impossible. You know this is dangerous, she murmured, leaning against her car door. And yet, he said, stepping closer, I can't stop wanting to see you. The kiss that followed wasn't planned, wasn't careful. It was a surrender. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, the air between them charged with electricity. Dinner? She whispered against his lips. Tomorrow night, he agreed. I'll pick you up at 7. As she drove home through the glittering city streets, Zaira touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. She was falling for a man whose world was so different from hers it might as well be another planet. But for the first time in years she felt truly alive. The restaurant Caleb chose was tucked away in Capitol Hill, far from the downtown corridors where their worlds might collide. Candlelight flickered across intimate tables, and the soft murmur of conversation created a cocoon of privacy that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Zaira arrived first, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her dress, the nicest one she owned, purchased for job interviews but never worn anywhere this romantic. When Caleb walked through the door, scanning the room until his eyes found hers, her breath caught. He looked different away from his office, more relaxed, more human. You look beautiful, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. You look surprised to be here, she replied, noting the tension in his shoulders. He laughed, some of the stiffness melting away. I am. I don't usually date interns. Date anyone actually. Not like this. He gestured between them. Not real. The admission hung in the air, vulnerable and honest. Zaira felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she hadn't realized she'd built beginning to crumble. What's real to you? She asked. This, he said simply. Sitting here with someone who challenges every assumption I've made about my life. Someone who sees me, not my last name. Their conversation flowed like wine, intoxicating and warm. He told her about boarding school loneliness, about family dinners that felt like board meetings. She shared her mother's wisdom, the way poverty had taught her to value what truly mattered. My mother used to say that rich people and poor people want the same things, Zaira said, twirling pasta around her fork. Love, respect, purpose. The difference is how much noise surrounds those wants. And I live in a very noisy world, Caleb observed. The noisiest. But underneath all that noise, who are you? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the candlelight. I'm a man who's been waiting his whole life for someone to ask that question. When he walked her to her car that night, the Seattle streets glistened with rain that caught the streetlights like scattered diamonds. They moved slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. Zaira, he said as they reached her car. Yes. I want to see you again. Not for business. Not for coffee. For this. She turned to face him, her back against the car door. You know what people would say. I don't care what people say. You should. Your family, your career, your reputation. He silenced her with a kiss, soft and searching, his hands framing her face. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Let me worry about my reputation, he whispered against her forehead. Can you do that? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Because I'm falling for you, Zaira Ellis. And I don't want to stop. What began that night was a love affair conducted in shadows and stolen moments. They met at quiet restaurants in neighborhoods where no one knew the Whitlock name. They took long drives along the coast, talking until dawn painted the sky pink and gold. He showed her hidden corners of the city, a bookstore that stayed open late, a jazz club where musicians played for the love of music rather than money. This is my Seattle, he said one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking Elliott Bay. The one that exists when I'm not being Caleb Whitlock. And who are you when you're not being Caleb Whitlock? I'm just a man who's crazy about a brilliant woman who makes him want to be better. She leaned into his warmth, watching ferries cross the dark water. What would better look like? Using the foundation for real change, not just tax write-offs. Building something that matters. Maybe running for office someday, but on my own terms. You could do that. With you beside me, I think I could do anything. The words should have thrilled her. Instead, they sent a chill down her spine. Beside him in his world meant stepping into a spotlight that would examine every aspect of her life, her background, her worthiness. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the warmth of his hand in hers. Their physical relationship deepened with the same intensity as their emotional connection. The first time he took her to his apartment, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, she felt like she was entering another universe. "This is where you live?" she asked, spinning slowly to take in the space. "This is where I sleep," he corrected. "I live when I'm with you." He made love to her with a tenderness that surprised them both, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, talking about everything and nothing. "Tell me about your mother," he said, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "She's the strongest person I know. Raised me alone after my father left when I was 3. Worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, but she never complained. Never made me feel like I was a burden. She sounds incredible." "She is. She'd like you, I think." She always said to judge people by their actions, not their circumstances. "And what do my actions tell you?" Zaira turned to face him, studying the face that had become so dear to her. "That you're kinder than you let people see. That you're lonely in a way that has nothing to do with being alone. That you're searching for something real in a world full of pretense." "I found it," he said, pulling her closer. "I found you." But even in their most intimate moments, reality lurked at the edges. Phone calls he had to take in another room. Events he attended alone. The careful way he checked restaurant reservations to ensure they wouldn't encounter anyone from his circle. Their relationship found its rhythm in stolen weekends at his family's cabin outside the city. Nestled among towering pines with a view of the lake, it became their sanctuary, the one place where they could simply be Caleb and Zaira, without the weight of expectations or the fear of discovery. "I could stay here forever," she said one Sunday morning, curled against his chest as sunlight streamed through the windows. "So could I," he murmured into her hair. "Just us, away from everything." "But we can't, can we?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Not yet. But someday maybe we won't have to hide." "When?" "When I figure out how to make this work. How to bring you into my world without destroying what we have." She lifted her head to look at him. "What if your world doesn't want me? Then I'll change my world." The promise sounded beautiful in the morning light, but Zaira was beginning to understand the difference between wanting to change and actually having the courage to do it. As autumn deepened into winter, their relationship intensified. They spoke in whispers about a future together, about the life they could build if they were brave enough to reach for it. He talked about introducing her to his family, about making their relationship public, about the foundation work they could do together. "You make me want to be the man I always thought I could be," he told her one evening as they walked through Pioneer Square, hands clasped, moving like any other couple in love. "You already are that man," she replied. "You just need to let the world see him." But the world they lived in had rules, and those rules were becoming harder to ignore. She noticed the way his assistant's smile grew strained when scheduling their meetings. The way certain colleagues looked at her with speculation when she appeared at foundation events. The careful distance Caleb maintained in public, even as he pulled her closer in private. "People are starting to talk," Naomi warned one evening as they shared takeout in Zaira's small apartment. "My cousin works at the foundation. She says there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that could hurt both of you." "Caleb's family doesn't play games, Zaira. They protect their interests." "Caleb loves me. I believe that. But love and courage aren't the same thing. And when push comes to shove, men like him usually choose the path of least resistance." Zaira wanted to argue, but doubt had already begun to creep in. Because for all their whispered promises and stolen moments, Caleb had yet to take a single public step toward claiming her as his own. The warning signs were subtle but persistent. Phone calls that made him tense. Family obligations that kept him away for days. The way he sometimes looked at her with something that might have been regret, as if he were already mourning what they had. "Is everything okay?" she asked one December evening after he'd been unusually quiet during dinner. "Of course. Why? You seem distant lately. Distracted." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I'm sorry. Work has been intense. Family pressure about the foundation's direction, political expectations. Sometimes I feel like I'm being pulled in a dozen different directions. And where do I fit in all of that?" "You're my anchor," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. "You're the one thing in my life that makes sense." But even as he said it, she could see the conflict in his eyes. The war between what he wanted and what he'd been raised to believe he needed. They made love that night with a desperate intensity, as if they were trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Afterward, as he slept beside her, Zaira stared at the ceiling and wondered if love was enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. She was about to find out that sometimes, life forces the choices we're too afraid to make ourselves. The morning sickness started as a whisper, a queasy feeling that Zaira dismissed as stress from final exams and too much coffee. December had arrived with its usual chaos of deadlines and holiday obligations, and her body felt like it was running on fumes. She was reviewing contracts in the Foundation's library when the nausea struck with sudden force. Racing to the bathroom, she barely made it before her stomach rebelled completely. As she splashed cold water on her face, staring at her pale reflection, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. When was her last period? That evening she sat on her bathroom floor, hands shaking as she stared at the pregnancy test. The instructions seemed simple enough, but her mind felt foggy with disbelief. 2 minutes felt like hours as she paced her tiny apartment, checking her phone, reorganizing her bookshelf, doing anything to avoid looking at that small plastic window. When she finally gathered the courage to check, 2 pink lines stared back at her, clear, undeniable, life-changing. Pregnant. She sank onto the cold tile, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Baby. Their baby. The thought sent waves of terror and joy crashing through her in equal measure. She thought of her mother, who had raised her alone with such strength and grace. She thought of Caleb, of the whispered promises they'd made in the darkness of his cabin. We're going to have a baby, she whispered to her reflection, testing how the words felt. They sounded surreal, impossible, wonderful, and terrifying all at once. For 3 days she carried the secret like a precious stone, turning it over in her mind, examining it from every angle. She imagined Caleb's face when she told him, the way his eyes would light up with surprise and joy. She pictured them planning a future together, no more hiding, no more stolen moments. A baby would change everything, it would force them into the light. When Caleb arrived at her apartment that Thursday evening, she had candles lit and his favorite takeout waiting. He looked tired, stress lines etched around his eyes, but he smiled when he saw her. This is nice, he said, pulling her into his arms. What's the occasion? Can't I surprise the man I love? You can surprise me anytime. He kissed her forehead, then studied her face. You look different. Glowing. Her heart raced. Do I? Beautiful as always, but there's something. He shrugged, settling onto her couch. Maybe it's just the candlelight. They ate dinner talking about their days, the easy conversation that had become their rhythm. But Zaira could barely taste her food, her stomach churning with anticipation. Finally, as they cleared the dishes, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. Caleb, she said, taking his hands and leading him back to the couch. I have something to tell you. He settled beside her, concern flickering across his features. Everything okay? She took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. For a moment, Caleb just stared at her, his expression unreadable. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been fear. Pregnant? He repeated slowly as if testing the word. Yes. She squeezed his hands, willing him to share her joy. We're going to have a baby, Caleb. Our baby. Instead of the smile she'd hoped for, his face went pale. He pulled his hands free, running them through his hair in the gesture she'd learned meant panic. Are you sure? I took 3 tests. I'm sure. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This is unexpected. The word stung. Unexpected, yes. But not unwelcome. Right? He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. Zaira, you have to understand. This changes everything. I know it changes everything. That's what I'm hoping for. No, you don't understand. His voice carried a sharpness she'd never heard before. My family, my career, the foundation. There are expectations, plans that have been in place for years. She stood slowly, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. What are you saying? I'm saying this complicates things in ways you can't imagine. Complicates things? Her voice rose. This is our child, Caleb. Our future. Is it? The question came out harsher than he'd intended, and she flinched as if he'd struck her. What do you mean, is it? He closed his eyes, seeming to gather himself. When he opened them, the man she loved was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. I mean, are you certain it's mine? The accusation landed like a physical blow, stealing her breath. How dare you? I had to ask. No, you didn't. You know exactly how many people I've been with. You know I haven't been with anyone else since we started this. I know I'm sorry. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. This is a disaster. A disaster? Tears burned her eyes. Our baby is a disaster? You don't understand the position this puts me in. My mother has been planning my political future since I was born. There are alliances, expectations, a very specific path I'm supposed to follow. And I'm not on that path. No, he said quietly. You're not. The simple honesty of it broke something inside her. So what are you saying? That you want me to? I'm saying we need to think about this rationally. You're young, you have your whole career ahead of you. A baby now would derail everything you've worked for. That's my choice to make. Is it? What about law school? What about your dreams? My dreams include you. The words tore from her throat. I thought your dreams included me too. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. They do. But dreams and reality are different things. So this is reality? You abandoning me the moment things get complicated? I'm not abandoning you. I'm trying to be practical. Practical. She laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling cowardice now? He stood, anger flashing in his eyes. You think this is easy for me? You think I don't care about you? I think you care more about your reputation than you do about me. I think you care more about your mother's approval than you do about our child. That's not fair. Fair? She wiped tears from her cheeks. What's fair about any of this? What's fair about falling in love with someone who promised to protect me and is now asking me to erase our future? I never promised. You did promise. Maybe not in words, but in every touch, every whispered conversation, every time you told me I was your anchor. You promised me a future, Caleb. And now you're taking it back because it's inconvenient. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they couldn't take back. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want me to do? I want you to choose us. I want you to fight for this family we could have. And if I can't? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Zaira felt something inside her chest crack and crumble. Then I guess I have my answer about what I really mean to you. He moved toward her, reaching out, but she stepped back. Don't touch me while you're deciding whether we're worth fighting for. Zaira, please. I need time to figure this out. Time? She laughed through her tears. How much time, Caleb? How long do I wait while you decide if your child is worth the inconvenience? It's not that simple. It is that simple. Either you love me enough to choose me or you don't. Either this baby matters enough to fight for or it doesn't. He stood there, torn between two worlds, unable to choose either. In his silence, Zaira found her answer. Get out, she whispered. Zaira. Get out. The words exploded from her. Get out and don't come back until you decide what kind of man you want to be. He gathered his jacket, moving toward the door like a man walking to his execution. At the threshold he turned back. I do love you. Love isn't enough if you're too afraid to fight for it. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. Zaira sank onto her couch, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other covering her mouth to muffle her sobs. She had expected joy, celebration, planning for their future. Instead, she was alone with a secret that felt more like a burden than a blessing. But as she sat there in the wreckage of her dreams, something fierce and protective stirred inside her. This baby, their baby, deserved better than a father who saw them as a complication. This child deserved to be wanted, celebrated, fought for. If Caleb couldn't give them that, then she would. Have you ever had someone you love make you feel like your dreams were an inconvenience? Zaira's heartbreak is so raw and real. Drop a comment below. Do you think she's right to demand he choose? 2 days passed in suffocating silence. Zaira moved through her routine like a ghost, attending classes, completing assignments, showing up to her internship with a smile that felt painted on. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped, hoping it was Caleb calling to say he'd made his choice, that he was ready to fight for them. But the calls never came. On the third evening, as she sat in her apartment grading papers for a professor to earn extra money, her phone finally rang. Caleb's name flashed on the screen and relief flooded through her. Caleb? Zaira. His voice sounded strained, distant. We need to talk. Yes, we do. Have you? Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow evening? There's something I need to show you, something that might help you understand. Hope flickered in her chest. Maybe he'd found a way. Maybe he'd figured out how to make this work. Where? The Whitlock estate. 7 o'clock. The line went dead before she could respond. The Whitlock estate, she'd never been there, had only seen photographs in society magazines. If he was bringing her to his family home, maybe that meant he was ready to introduce her properly, to make their relationship real. She spent the next day in a haze of nervous anticipation, changing clothes 3 times before settling on a simple black dress that was elegant but not presumptuous. As her taxi wound through the exclusive Medina neighborhood, past gates that guarded mansions like fortresses, her stomach churned with anxiety. The Whitlock estate rose before her like something from a fairy tale, all stone and glass and perfectly manicured grounds. A uniformed staff member answered the door, leading her through halls lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors and into a sitting room that probably cost more than most people's houses. She expected to find Caleb waiting for her. Instead, a woman emerged from the shadows, tall, silver-haired, wearing pearls and authority like armor. Even without introduction, Zaira knew exactly who she was. Miss Ellis. The woman's voice could have frozen fire. I'm Margaret Whitlock, Caleb's mother. Mrs. Whitlock. Zaira stood, extending her hand. It's nice to finally meet you. The woman ignored the gesture, settling into a chair across from her with the precision of a queen taking her throne. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Is Caleb? My son is not here. This conversation is between you and me. Dread began to pool in Zaira's stomach. I don't understand. I think you do. Margaret's eyes were ice blue chips that seemed to see straight through her. You're pregnant with what you claim is my son's child. The bluntness of it stole Zaira's breath. It's not a claim. It's a fact. Facts can be interpreted in various ways. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you're telling the truth. Do you have any idea what you're asking of him? I'm not asking anything. I'm simply telling him he's going to be a father. Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. How refreshingly naive. Do you think love conquers all, Miss Ellis? Do you believe in fairy tales? I believe in taking responsibility for your actions. Responsibility. The woman savored the word like fine wine. Let me tell you about responsibility. My son has obligations that stretch back generations. Political alliances, business partnerships, a legacy that affects thousands of people. His future has been carefully planned since birth. And I'm not part of that plan. You're a complication that threatens everything we've built. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. But complications can be resolved. She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the coffee table between them. Inside that envelope is enough money to ensure you never have to worry about your future again. Enough to finish law school, start your own practice, live comfortably for years. Zaira stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to be practical. You're young, intelligent, ambitious. A child now would derail everything you've worked for. This money would give you the freedom to pursue your dreams without the burden of single motherhood. The burden? Zaira's voice rose. This is your grandchild we're talking about. This is a mistake that needs to be corrected before it destroys multiple lives. The words landed like physical blows, each one designed to wound. Zaira felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of this woman. Where is Caleb? I want to hear this from him. My son is a good man, but he's weak when it comes to matters of the heart. He would make promises he can't keep, commitments that would ruin him. I'm protecting him from his own misguided nobility. You're protecting your reputation. I'm protecting my family. Something you would understand if you truly cared about Caleb. The manipulation was masterful, designed to make Zaira question her own motives. But beneath the polished cruelty she heard something else, fear. This woman was afraid of her, afraid of what she represented. I won't take your money, Zaira said quietly. Then you're more foolish than I thought. Margaret's mask slipped, revealing the steel beneath. Do you think this is the only option? Do you think I won't protect my son by other means? Are you threatening me? I'm educating you about reality. You come from nothing, Miss Ellis. No family connections, no social standing, no resources to fight a legal battle that could stretch for years. One phone call from me could end your internship, destroy your academic standing, ensure you never work in law in this city again. The threat hung in the air like poison. Zaira felt the walls closing in, the careful life she'd built threatening to crumble. But it doesn't have to come to that, Margaret continued, her voice softening to false kindness. Take the money. Handle this quietly. Move on with your life. In 5 years, you'll thank me for saving you from a mistake that would have destroyed your future. And Caleb? What does he think about this? My son understands duty, even when his heart tries to lead him astray. He knows what needs to be done. As if summoned by her words, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes unable to meet Zaira's. Caleb. She stood, hope and desperation warring in her voice. Tell me you didn't know about this. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked everywhere but at her face. Tell me you didn't send me here to be bought off by your mother. Zaira. His voice cracked. You have to understand. The pressure, the expectations. I understand perfectly. The words came out steady though her world was collapsing. You're choosing them over us. It's not that simple. It is that simple. She turned to face him fully, memorizing his face one last time. You're choosing your family's money and reputation over your own child. You're choosing comfort over courage. Please just take the money. It would be better for everyone. The betrayal was complete. Not just the money, not just his mother's threats, but his presence here, his participation in this orchestrated humiliation. He had brought her here knowing what would happen, knowing his mother would try to buy her silence. Better for everyone except our baby. Zaira, please. You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. This would ruin everything. This would ruin your everything. My everything is growing inside me. She picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. More money than she'd ever seen, enough to solve every financial worry she'd ever had. All she had to do was erase the future she'd dreamed of. You know what the saddest part is? She said, looking between mother and son. I actually thought you loved me enough to fight for us. I do love you, Caleb whispered. No, you don't. You love the idea of me. You love how I made you feel about yourself. But you don't love me enough to choose me when it matters. She walked to the fireplace and, without hesitation, threw the envelope into the flames. The paper caught immediately, money turning to ash before their eyes. Margaret gasped. You foolish girl. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I've just shown you that your grandchild isn't for sale. She turned to Caleb one last time. I hope your family's approval keeps you warm at night. Because you've just lost the best thing that ever happened to you. Zaira, wait. But she was already walking away, her heels clicking against marble floors that had witnessed generations of Whitlock power plays. She didn't look back, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. It wasn't until she was in the taxi, Seattle's lights blurring past the windows, that she allowed herself to cry. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her soul, mourning not just the loss of love but the death of every dream she'd built around it. But even through her tears, one thought burned bright and fierce. She would not let them win. She would not let their money and threats determine her future or her child's. She pressed her hand to her stomach, whispering through her tears, It's just you and me now, baby. But I promise you this, you will be wanted. You will be loved. And you will never, ever be ashamed of who you are. This betrayal is so deep and calculated. Margaret Whitlock is absolutely ruthless and Caleb's weakness is heartbreaking. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to buy your silence or compromise your values? Drop your thoughts below. Was Zaira right to burn the money, or should she have taken it for her child's future? Hit that like button if you're proud of her strength in this moment. The clinic waiting room smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Zaira sat in a plastic chair, her hands folded over the envelope that had arrived 3 days after her confrontation with the Whitlocks. A different envelope, this one containing a check and a note in Caleb's handwriting. Please. For both of us. She stared at the amount until the numbers blurred. Enough money to take care of it, as he'd so coldly put it. Enough to erase the inconvenience she'd become. Zaira Ellis? A nurse appeared, clipboard in hand, voice professionally gentle. She stood on unsteady legs, following the woman down a hallway lined with motivational posters that felt like mockery. In the consultation room, forms waited on the desk, consent papers that would end everything growing inside her. The nurse explained the procedure with clinical efficiency while Zaira nodded numbly. When the woman left her alone to take her time deciding, Zaira picked up the pen with trembling fingers. Her signature would solve everything. No more complicated pregnancy, no more single motherhood, no more burden on her dreams. She could finish law school, build her career, pretend none of this had ever happened. The pen hovered over the signature line. But as she sat there, something shifted inside her chest. A fierce, protective instinct she'd never felt before rose up like a tide. She pressed her free hand to her stomach, and for the first time since learning she was pregnant, she spoke directly to the life growing there. They want me to erase you, she whispered. They think you're a mistake, a complication, something to be solved with money and silence. The pen trembled in her grip. But you're not a mistake. You're mine. And if I have to choose between their approval and your life, I choose you. I will always choose you. The pen clattered to the floor. She stood abruptly, gathering her purse, leaving the unsigned forms on the desk. In the hallway, the nurse looked up in surprise. Miss Ellis? Is everything all right? I can't do this, Zaira said, her voice stronger than she'd felt in days. I'm keeping my baby. The nurse nodded with understanding. That's your choice to make. Take care of yourself. Walking out into the Seattle drizzle, Zaira felt something she hadn't experienced since that night at the Whitlock estate. Hope. Not for reconciliation, not for Caleb to change his mind, but for the future she would build with her own hands. That evening she called her best friend Naomi, who arrived within the hour carrying Chinese takeout and a fierce expression. You did the right thing, Naomi said after Zaira explained everything. That family is toxic and you're better off without them. I'm terrified, Zaira admitted, picking at her low mane. I have no idea how to raise a child alone. You won't be alone. You have me, you have your strength, and you have more courage than any of those Whitlock cowards. What if I can't do it? What if I fail? Naomi reached across the table, gripping her hands. Then you'll figure it out and try again. That's what strong women do. That's what your mother did. The mention of her mother sent a pang through Zaira's chest. She'd been putting off that phone call, dreading the disappointment, the worry, the questions she couldn't answer. I have to tell my mom. She'll be proud of you for choosing love over fear. That night, Zaira made the call. Her mother listened in silence as she explained everything. The relationship, the pregnancy, the betrayal, her decision to keep the baby. Oh, sweetheart, her mother said finally, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry you're going through this alone. I'm not alone. I have you. Always. And this baby is lucky to have a mother brave enough to choose them over convenience. I'm scared, Mom. Good. Fear means you understand how important this is. But don't let fear paralyze you. Let it motivate you to build something better. With her mother's support and Naomi's unwavering friendship, Zaira began to rebuild her life piece by piece. She moved to a smaller apartment in a quieter neighborhood, trading downtown convenience for affordability and space for a nursery. The pregnancy progressed with surprising smoothness, though the emotional weight remained heavy. She threw herself into her studies with renewed focus, determined to graduate on time despite everything. Her professors, unaware of her personal struggles, praised her dedication and insight. At her 3-month appointment, she sat alone in the examination room, watching the ultrasound technician prepare the equipment. She'd grown accustomed to solitude at these moments, to being the only one who cared about the tiny life growing inside her. Let's see how baby's doing, the technician said, spreading gel across Zaira's belly. The wand moved across her skin, and suddenly the room filled with sound, a rapid rhythmic beating that made Zaira's eyes fill with tears. Strong heartbeat, the technician murmured, adjusting the angle. Then she paused, frowning slightly. Let me just... Is something wrong? Zaira's voice was tight with fear. Not wrong. Just, interesting. The woman smiled, turning the screen toward her. Congratulations. You're having triplets. The words didn't register at first. I'm sorry, what? 3 babies. 3 healthy heartbeats. Looks like you're in for quite an adventure. Zaira stared at the screen, at the 3 tiny forms that would become her children. Laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, surprising them both. 3, she whispered, pressing her hands to her belly. I thought I was fighting for one, but I was fighting for all of you. The drive home was a blur of emotions. Terror at the thought of raising 3 children alone, joy at the abundance of life inside her, and a fierce determination that burned brighter than ever. If Caleb thought 1 baby was too much responsibility, 3 would have sent him running even faster. But she wasn't running. She was building. The pregnancy with triplets was relentless. Morning sickness stretched well into the 2nd trimester, her body ached constantly, and simple tasks became monumental challenges. But Zaira pushed forward with stubborn determination. She pieced together freelance work from home, proofreading legal documents, preparing briefs for overworked attorneys, tutoring law students online. The pay was modest, but it allowed her to work around doctor's appointments and the crushing fatigue that came with carrying 3 babies. Naomi became her lifeline, grocery shopping when Zaira couldn't stand for long periods, assembling cribs when her back screamed in protest, and providing the emotional support that kept her sane during the darkest moments. You're glowing, Naomi said one evening as they folded tiny clothes donated by neighbors and church members. I'm exhausted. You can be both. You're creating 3 human beings while building a business and finishing law school. You're basically a superhero. I don't feel like a superhero. I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. That's what makes you a superhero. You keep going even when it's impossible. As her belly grew, so did her resolve. She researched everything: child development, nutrition, financial planning for multiple children. She read parenting books until her eyes burned, determined to give her children everything they needed despite having only one parent. The legal consultancy she'd started from necessity began to grow through word of mouth. Churches recommended her to families who couldn't afford traditional legal fees. Community centers passed along her name to immigrants needing help with documentation. Single mothers like herself sought her guidance on custody and support issues. "You're building something important," her mother said during one of their weekly calls. "You're helping people who have nowhere else to turn. I'm just trying to survive." "You're doing more than surviving, honey. You're thriving. And you're showing those babies that strength isn't about having everything handed to you, it's about creating something from nothing." At 7 months, contractions started during a particularly stressful day of client calls and law school deadlines. Naomi rushed her to the hospital, gripping her hand as doctors wheeled her into delivery. "It's too early," Zaira gasped between contractions. "Babies come when they're ready," the doctor said calmly. "Let's focus on bringing them safely into the world." Hours blurred together in a haze of pain, exhaustion, and overwhelming love. When the first cry pierced the air, Zaira sobbed with relief. "It's a boy," the nurse announced, placing a tiny, perfect baby on her chest. Kai arrived fighting, his fists balled and his voice strong despite his early entrance. Then came Leora, smaller but fierce, her cries sharp and demanding. Finally, Saren emerged quietly, blinking at the world with calm curiosity. "3 perfect babies," the doctor said, smiling as nurses bustled around them. "Small but healthy. You did beautifully." Zaira looked down at her children, and felt her heart expand beyond anything she'd thought possible. They were tiny, fragile, completely dependent on her, and absolutely perfect. "You were supposed to be erased," she whispered, pressing her lips to each small forehead. "But you're here. You're mine. And I will never let anyone make you feel unwanted again." The first year was a marathon of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and moments when she questioned her sanity. 3 babies meant 3 times the diapers, 3 times the crying, 3 times the worry. But it also meant 3 times the love, 3 times the laughter, 3 times the joy. Her legal consultancy grew steadily as clients appreciated her dedication and insight. She worked during nap times, took calls while babies played at her feet, and somehow managed to build a reputation for excellence despite the chaos of her personal life. "How do you do it?" asked Maria, a single mother seeking help with a custody case, watching Zaira juggle a phone call while Kai tugged at her leg and the girls played nearby. "One day at a time," Zaira replied, lifting Kai onto her hip. "Some days 1 hour at a time." "You make it look easy." "It's not easy. But it's worth it." By the time the triplets turned 2, Zaira had established herself as one of Seattle's most trusted family law consultants. Her client base was diverse: immigrants, single parents, families facing financial hardship, people who needed legal help but couldn't afford the big firms. She'd also graduated law school with honors, walking across the stage with her mother and children cheering from the audience. The Whitlock Foundation had sent a congratulatory card, a gesture so hollow it went straight into the trash. "Look what you built," Naomi said one evening as they watched the children play in Zaira's small but comfortable living room. "Look what you created from nothing." Zaira surveyed her life, the thriving business, the healthy children, the peace she'd found in her own strength. "I didn't create it from nothing. I created it from love. And spite," Naomi added with a grin. "Don't forget the spite. Nothing motivates like proving people wrong." Zaira laughed, pulling Saren onto her lap as Kai and Leora built towers with blocks. "Maybe a little spite. This transformation is incredible, from heartbroken and abandoned to building an empire of love and success. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch? What gave you the strength to keep going? Share your story in the comments below, and hit that like button if you're inspired by Zaira's journey from victim to victor. As she tucked her children into bed that night, Zaira reflected on how far they'd all come. She'd chosen love over fear, courage over comfort, and built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. 5 years later, Zaira Ellis stood in her corner office overlooking Elliott Bay, watching ferries cut through water that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the afternoon sun. The nameplate on her desk read, Alice Family Law, Zaira Alice Esq, and the walls displayed her law degree alongside photographs of her 3 children and letters of gratitude from clients whose lives she'd helped rebuild. Michelle considered the question carefully. James, the moment I saw Tommy's chart, I made a choice. I could let our past define how I cared for your son, or I could let my training in ethics guide me. There was never really a choice at all. But surely you felt some satisfaction? Some sense of vindication? I felt responsibility, Michelle replied simply. Tommy needed the best care I could provide. Everything else was irrelevant. James shook his head in wonder. 8 years ago, I told you that you had no future in real medicine. Now you've saved my son's life with a level of skill and compassion that humbles me completely. You were wrong about my future, Michelle acknowledged. But you were also wrong about what real medicine means. It's not about credentials or titles. It's about seeing patients as whole human beings and dedicating yourself to their healing. On Tommy's final day in the hospital, he insisted on walking to the elevator under his own power. His steps were steady, his breathing unlabored, his smile radiant with the joy of a child discovering what it felt like to have a strong heart. Dr. Michelle, he said, hugging her goodbye, when I play my first soccer game, will you come watch? I wouldn't miss it, Michelle promised, meaning every word. As the elevator doors closed on Tommy and his father, Michelle reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all to this moment. Sometimes the most devastating rejections become the most powerful catalysts for transformation. And sometimes the greatest victories aren't about proving others wrong, they're about proving yourself right. The promise had been kept. Tommy would run, play, and dream without limitations. And in keeping that promise, Michelle had discovered that the most meaningful success comes not from personal vindication, but from using your gifts to change someone else's world forever. 3 weeks after Tommy's discharge, Michelle received an unexpected call during her morning surgical rounds. The voice on the other end was breathless with excitement. Dr. Michelle. I ran around the whole playground without stopping. Tommy's voice bubbled through the phone speaker. And I wasn't even tired. Michelle smiled, pausing her chart review to give Tommy her full attention. That's incredible, Tommy. How did it feel? Like flying. Dad says I can start soccer practice next month if you say it's okay. Let's see how you're doing at your follow-up appointment next week, and then we'll talk about soccer, Michelle replied, though she already knew Tommy's recovery was exceeding all expectations. After ending the call, Michelle reflected on the transformation she had witnessed. Tommy's physical healing was remarkable, but equally impressive was watching James evolve from the arrogant executive she had encountered years ago into a devoted father whose priorities had been completely reordered by his son's illness. The following week brought Tommy's first post-operative appointment. He bounded into Michelle's office with energy that would have been impossible before surgery, his cheeks pink with health and his eyes bright with anticipation. Dr. Michelle, look. Tommy demonstrated by running in place, his breathing steady and unlabored. I can do this forever now. Michelle conducted her examination with growing satisfaction. Tommy's surgical sites had healed perfectly, his heart function was excellent, and his exercise tolerance was completely normal for a child his age. Well? James asked anxiously. Can he start soccer? Tommy, Michelle said seriously, I think you're ready for anything you want to try. Soccer, swimming, running, your heart is strong enough for all of it. Tommy's whoop of joy filled the office, and he immediately began planning his athletic future with the enthusiasm of a child who had never been able to make such plans before. After Tommy left with his father to register for soccer, Michelle found herself thinking about the broader implications of their story. One successful surgery had changed a child's life, but it had also transformed the perspective of a man whose influence extended far beyond his family. 2 days later, James requested another meeting. This time, he arrived at Michelle's office carrying a thick folder and wearing the focused expression of someone who had been working on something important. Dr. Harris, I've been developing a proposal, he began, opening the folder to reveal detailed plans and financial projections. I want to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting healthcare professionals from non-traditional backgrounds who want to advance their careers. Michelle studied the documents, impressed by the thoroughness of his research. This is comprehensive. You've clearly put significant thought into this. I've spent the last month talking to nurses, physician assistants, and other healthcare workers who have innovative ideas but lack the platform or resources to implement them. The stories I've heard are remarkable, and remarkably similar to yours. James pulled out a specific section of his proposal. I want to call it the Harris Foundation for Medical Innovation. Full scholarships for nurses pursuing medical school, research grants for developing new technologies, and mentorship programs connecting experienced physicians with healthcare professionals seeking to expand their roles. Why use my name? Because you represent everything this foundation should stand for. You took an idea that could save lives, faced rejection based on prejudice rather than merit, and then transformed yourself into someone who couldn't be dismissed. Your story needs to inspire others. Michelle considered the proposal carefully. The foundation could provide opportunities for countless healthcare professionals who faced the same barriers she had encountered. But it also represented a level of public visibility that made her uncomfortable. James, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure I want to be the face of this foundation. My focus is on my patients and my surgical practice. I understand your hesitation. But consider this, how many brilliant nurses are working in hospitals right now with ideas that could revolutionize patient care? How many are being dismissed because they don't have the right credentials or connections? The question resonated deeply with Michelle. She thought about her colleagues from St. Catherine's, about the insights and innovations that went unrecognized because they came from bedside caregivers rather than research laboratories. What would my involvement actually entail? Help design the selection criteria. Participate in mentorship programs. Share your story to inspire others. You wouldn't need to abandon your surgical practice. This would complement it. Michelle spent the next week considering James's proposal. She consulted with Dr. Vasquez, who enthusiastically supported the idea, and with colleagues who had witnessed her journey from nurse to surgeon. You have an obligation to help others follow the path you've created, Dr. Vasquez told her during one of their conversations. Your success opens doors, but only if you're willing to hold them open for others. The decision crystallized during a conversation with Maria Santos, a nurse practitioner who had been working in the pediatric ICU for 15 years. Maria had developed a protocol for early detection of sepsis in children that had dramatically reduced mortality rates in their unit. As she worked, memories surfaced, not of Caleb but of herself before him. The young woman who'd believed in possibilities, who'd seen beauty in small moments, who'd dreamed of making a difference in the world. She had made a difference, just not in the way she'd originally imagined. Instead of changing the world through grand gestures, she'd changed it one family at a time, one child at a time, one case at a time. Her phone buzzed with the nightly call from her children, their excited voices overlapping as they told her about their day with Grandma, the park they'd visited, the cookies they'd baked, the stories she'd told them about their mother's childhood. "We miss you, Mommy," Saren said, her voice sleepy. "I miss you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." After they hung up, Zaira looked at the painting she'd created, abstract swirls of blue and gold that somehow captured the feeling of hope emerging from darkness. She'd titled it, in her mind, Rising. Because that's what she'd done. She'd risen from the ashes of betrayal, from the fear of single motherhood, from the doubt that she could build something meaningful on her own. She'd risen not just for herself but for her children, showing them that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up every time you did. This transformation is so inspiring, from heartbroken intern to successful attorney and devoted mother. Have you ever had to completely reinvent yourself after a major setback? What helped you find your strength? Share your story in the comments, and hit that like button if you believe in the power of rising from your lowest moments. As she cleaned her brushes and put away her paints, Zaira felt something she hadn't experienced in years, excitement about her own future. Not just as a mother or a lawyer, but as a woman with dreams still worth pursuing. The terminal buzzed with its usual chaos, flight announcements echoing overhead, families rushing toward arrivals, children squealing as they spotted familiar faces through glass doors. Luggage wheels clattered against polished floors, rolling in steady rhythms through the crowded space. Zaira walked among them with quiet dignity, her braids falling neatly over her shoulders, her suit crisp but practical. On either side of her, 3 small hands gripped her fingers tightly. Her triplets, radiant, restless, alive, pulled her forward with the impatient joy only children carried. "Mommy, are we late for Grandma?" Kai asked, his voice loud enough to draw a few stares. "No, baby, we're right on time," Zaira answered, smiling softly at him before glancing at his sisters. The children's laughter filled the air, innocent, unburdened by the heavy history, walking only a few feet away. He hadn't meant to look. Caleb had been waiting near the barrier for his assistant to return from New York, scrolling through emails on his phone, detached from the chaotic warmth around him. But then his gaze lifted, and his world froze. The faces of the 3 children locked him in place. His jawline, his storm gray eyes, his unmistakable blood staring back at him multiplied by 3. The noise of the airport blurred. His knees weakened, then gave way, and before he could stop himself, he was on the ground, surrounded by strangers, undone in front of the world. His voice cracked, barely a whisper. I paid to make sure they'd never exist. And yet here they are. How did you save them from me? Gasps rippled from the crowd. The children looked at him curiously, wide-eyed, tugging at their mother's arms. Zyra's expression did not soften. Her voice was steady, sharp enough to cut through the air. I didn't save them from you, Caleb. I saved them from the man you chose to be. He covered his face with both hands, shame spilling through him as the crowd murmured around them. 5 years of carefully constructed success, of political maneuvering and business deals, crumbled in an instant. Here, on his knees in a public space, he was nothing more than a man confronting the magnitude of his failures. Please, he whispered, looking up at her through tears. Let me explain. Explain what? Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned to command courtrooms and boardrooms. How you handed me money to erase them. How you stood by while your mother threatened to destroy my future. How you chose your family's approval over your own children. I was wrong. I was a coward. Yes, you were. But that doesn't change anything. Kai tilted his head, studying the man on the ground with the frank curiosity of a 5-year-old. Mama, who is he? The question hung in the air like a blade. Caleb's chest cracked with pain as he whispered, I'm your father. Leora stepped closer to Zyra, her small hand tightening around her mother's. But we don't have a father. You do, Zyra said quietly, her voice gentle but firm. He just wasn't ready to be one when you needed him. Saren, always the observer, watched Caleb with thoughtful eyes. Why are you crying? The innocent question broke him completely. Because I made the biggest mistake of my life and I can't take it back. Mommy says mistakes are for learning, Kai offered helpfully. Did you learn? Caleb looked at this boy, his son, who spoke with the wisdom of a child raised by a mother who'd turned pain into purpose. I'm trying to learn. But some mistakes take a very long time to understand. The crowd had grown larger, phones appearing as people recognized the Whitlock name being whispered through the gathering. Zyra noticed immediately, her protective instincts flaring. We're not doing this here, she said firmly. Not in front of them, not in front of cameras. She began to turn away, but Caleb's voice stopped her. Zyra, please. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please don't walk away. Not again. I didn't walk away last time, Caleb. You pushed me away. There's a difference. I know. And I've regretted it every day since. She studied his face, older now, marked by lines that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. The confident man who'd once commanded every room he entered was gone, replaced by someone broken and desperate. Regret isn't enough, she said finally. Regret doesn't undo 5 years of birthdays you missed, bedtime stories you didn't read, scraped knees you didn't kiss better. I know. But maybe I could start now? Maybe I could try to be the father they deserve. The father they deserve? Her laugh was sharp, bitter. The father they deserve would have fought for them from the beginning. The father they deserve would have chosen them over his reputation. You're right. But I'm here now. I'm asking, no, I'm begging, for a chance to try. Leora tugged at Zyra's sleeve. Mama, people are staring. Zyra looked around, noticing the phones, the whispered conversations, the way their private moment was becoming public spectacle. Her children didn't deserve this exposure, this chaos. We're leaving, she said, gathering the children closer. Wait. Caleb struggled to his feet, his legs unsteady. Please. Just tell me their names. She hesitated, then looked down at her children. These beautiful, brilliant souls who'd never asked to be caught in the crossfire of adult failures. Kai, she said, nodding toward her son. Leora and Saren. Each name was spoken like a prayer, like a gift she wasn't sure he deserved. Kai, Leora, Saren, he repeated as if memorizing sacred words. They're beautiful. They're perfect. They are. And they've been perfect without you. The words landed like physical blows, but he absorbed them without flinching. I know. But maybe they could be perfect with me too? Maybe I could learn to be worthy of them? Zyra was quiet for a long moment, studying his face, weighing his words against 5 years of silence. When she spoke, her voice was measured, controlled. You'll never have me back, she said firmly. That door is closed forever. You destroyed what we had, and I'll never forget that. Caleb bowed his head. I understand. But, she continued, and his head snapped up, hope flickering in his eyes, they deserve the truth. They deserve the chance to know their father if he's willing to earn that privilege. I'll do whatever it takes. You start at the bottom. You earn their trust one day at a time. You prove you can be more than a man who falls apart in airports. You show up, consistently, reliably, without drama or demands. Her gaze locked onto his, steel meeting desperation. And if you hurt them, if you disappoint them the way you disappointed me, I will make sure you never see them again. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Saren stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension. Are you really our daddy? Caleb knelt again, bringing himself to her eye level. Yes, sweetheart. I'm your daddy. And I'm very sorry it took me so long to meet you. Where were you? The question was simple, innocent, devastating. I was lost. But I'm here now if you'll let me be. Kai, ever practical, asked, Do you know how to play soccer? Despite everything, Caleb smiled through his tears. I do. Would you like me to teach you? Maybe, Kai said, then looked up at his mother. Is it okay, Mama? Zyra's throat tightened. These children, who'd never known a father's love, were already opening their hearts with the fearless trust of the innocent. It terrified and amazed her in equal measure. We'll see, she said carefully. We'll take it very slowly. She pulled out her phone, typing quickly. This is my number. You can call tomorrow evening at 7. We'll talk about how this might work. Caleb took the phone with shaking hands, entering his contact information. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'm not giving you anything, she corrected. I'm giving them the opportunity to get to know their father. Whether you prove worthy of that gift is entirely up to you. As they walked away, the children chattering excitedly about their unexpected encounter, Zyra felt the weight of the moment settling around her. She just opened a door she'd kept locked for 5 years, not for herself, but for 3 children who deserved every chance at love. Behind them, Caleb remained in the terminal, clutching his phone like a lifeline, finally understanding the true cost of his cowardice. He'd lost the love of his life, but perhaps, just perhaps, he might still have a chance to be the father his children deserved. 6 months later, Zyra sat in her office reviewing case files when her assistant knocked softly on the door. Your 7 o'clock is here, Jennifer said with a knowing smile. Through the glass windows, Zyra could see Caleb in the reception area, kneeling beside Kai as they worked on a puzzle together. Leora was showing him a drawing she'd made at school, while Saren quietly observed from her chair, still cautious but no longer afraid. The transformation had been gradual, measured in small moments rather than grand gestures. Caleb had kept every promise, shown up for every scheduled visit, and slowly, very slowly, earned fragments of trust from his children. He'd learned their favorite foods, their bedtime routines, their individual personalities. He'd attended soccer games and school plays, always respectful of boundaries, never presuming more than he'd earned. 5 more minutes, Zyra called out, watching as Kai high-fived his father over a completed puzzle piece. She'd been surprised by Caleb's patience, his willingness to accept whatever scraps of time she offered. The entitled man who'd once expected the world to bend to his will had been replaced by someone humble, grateful for every moment with his children. Mama, can Daddy come to my recital next week? Leora asked as they gathered their things. The word, Daddy, still caught Zyra off guard sometimes. Her children had begun using it naturally, without prompting, as Caleb proved himself worthy of the title through consistency and care. If he's available, Zyra replied, meeting Caleb's hopeful gaze. I'll be there, he said quietly. I wouldn't miss it. As they prepared to leave, Saren approached Zyra with the thoughtful expression that meant she was processing something important. Mama, are you happy that Daddy came back? The question was complex, layered with the wisdom of a child who sensed the undercurrents adults tried to hide. Zyra knelt to her daughter's level, choosing her words carefully. I'm happy that you and your brother and sister get to know your father. I'm happy that he's learning to be the daddy you deserve. But are you happy? Zyra glanced at Caleb, who was pretending not to listen while helping Kai with his backpack. I'm at peace, sweetheart. And sometimes that's even better than happy. That evening, after the children were in bed, Zyra reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. She'd learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or returning to what was. It was about releasing the poison of resentment for her own peace and her children's well-being. She'd also learned that strength wasn't about never falling down, it was about getting back up, rebuilding, and creating something beautiful from the broken pieces. Her children would grow up knowing that love wasn't about perfection, but about showing up, fighting for what mattered, and choosing courage over comfort. Caleb had learned the hardest lesson of all, that some choices echo through generations, that cowardice has consequences that stretch far beyond the moment of decision. But he'd also learned that redemption was possible, even if it looked different than he'd imagined. He would never have Zyra's love again, but he could earn his children's trust. He could be the father they deserved, even if he'd failed to be the man she'd needed. The story that had begun with betrayal and abandonment had evolved into something more complex. A tale of resilience, growth, and the transformative power of a mother's love. Zyra had turned her greatest heartbreak into her greatest strength, showing her children that they were worth fighting for, that their existence was a gift rather than a burden. As she tucked her children into bed that night, Zyra whispered the same words she'd spoken to them as babies: "You are wanted. You are loved. And you are never, ever a mistake." They'd grown up believing those words, and that belief had shaped them into confident, compassionate children who knew their worth. In the end, that was Zyra's greatest victory, not just surviving betrayal but thriving beyond it, and raising children who would never doubt their value. The man who'd once paid to erase them now spent his evenings reading them bedtime stories, finally understanding that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in money or status, but in the trust of a child who calls you daddy. Some stories don't end with the lovers reunited. Sometimes they end with something better. A family healed, children loved, and the knowledge that even our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strength. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they can rise from any betrayal, rebuild from any loss, and create something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. Your story isn't over, it's just beginning. Love doesn't always look like fairy tales. Sometimes it looks like a mother's fierce protection, a father's humble redemption, and children who grow up knowing they are worth fighting for. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful love story of all. Thank you for joining me on today's story. I will see you in the next one.